The blood-red sun dipped below the horizon as Zara Blackwood stumbled off the stagecoach into the dusty main street of Promise Creek, her torn dress and bruised face telling a story she couldn't bear to speak aloud. The year was 1876, and the Wyoming Territory offered what she desperately needed: anonymity and distance from the life she'd fled in Boston. She clutched her small leather satchel, containing little more than a tattered journal, a silver hairbrush that had belonged to her mother, and the last $3 to her name. No wedding ring, no family photographs, no letters of recommendation, nothing to prove she had ever been anyone or belonged anywhere. "End of the line, madam," the coach driver called, already busy unloading mail sacks and parcels for the handful of businesses lining the main street. Zara stood frozen, the reality of her situation settling over her like the fine layer of dust that clung to everything in this frontier town. She had come west on a desperate gamble, selling her last valuables for passage to this remote outpost where she prayed no one would think to look for her. A cool evening breeze kicked up, carrying the scent of horses, leather, and wood smoke. Promise Creek wasn't much to look at: a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, and scattered buildings spreading outward from the main thoroughfare. But to Zara, it represented something she hadn't felt in months: possibility. "You lost, miss." The deep voice startled her. Zara whirled around, her hand instinctively reaching to cover the fading bruise on her cheek. A tall man stood before her, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. His shoulders were broad beneath a worn leather vest, and his stance was casual yet somehow alert, like a man accustomed to watching his surroundings. Her voice failed her. What could she say? That she had fled across the country with nothing but her name? That she had no plan beyond escaping? The man stepped closer, and in the fading light, she could see his features more clearly. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with a strong jaw darkened by stubble and eyes the color of a summer sky. Not handsome in the refined way of Boston gentlemen, but striking in a rugged, weathered way that spoke of a life lived outdoors. "Name's Jake Thornton," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "Own the Double T Ranch outside of town." "Zara," she replied, offering only her first name. "Zara Blackwood." His eyes flickered briefly to her bruised cheek but returned to her eyes without comment. "You got somewhere to stay, Miss Blackwood?" The question brought her back to her immediate predicament. "I had hoped to find employment. Perhaps lodging would come with that." Jake Thornton's expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes softened. Widow Pearson at the boarding house might have a room. As for work, he glanced around the quiet street. Not much to be had in Promise Creek unless you're looking to serve drinks at the Silver Dollar. The thought of working in a saloon sent a chill down Zara's spine. She had come too far to end up in another situation where men would feel entitled to her. "I can cook," she offered quickly. "And so, I'm educated. I can read and write and keep accounts." Jake studied her for a long moment, and Zara forced herself to stand straight despite her exhaustion. "Double T's cook quit last week," he said finally. "Headed back east to marry his sweetheart. Been feeding 12 ranch hands with my own cooking since then." A slight grimace crossed his face. "Men are about ready to mutiny." Hope flickered in Zara's chest. "I could help with that." "Ranch is no place for a city woman," Jake warned. "It's rough living, hard work from sunup to sundown." "I'm stronger than I look," Zara said with more conviction than she felt. "And I'm a fast learner." Jake Thornton looked at her battered satchel, her worn shoes, and finally back to her determined face. Whatever he saw there seemed to make up his mind. "I'll take you to Widow Pearson's for tonight," he said. "If you still want the job in the morning, I'll come for you at first light. Pays $15 a month plus room and board in the cookhouse. It's separate from the bunkhouse, so you'll have your privacy." It wasn't much, but it was a chance to rebuild with honest work far from the shadows of her past. "Thank you, Mr. Thornton. I accept." As Jake led her toward the small boarding house at the end of the street, Zara felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a sliver of hope that perhaps she could forge a new life here in this dusty corner of Wyoming, where no one knew her name or the secrets she carried. The widow Pearson's boarding house was a modest two-story structure with lace curtains in the windows and a small garden struggling to survive in the arid climate. The widow herself was a plump, gray-haired woman with shrewd eyes that took in Zara's appearance with one sweeping glance. "Jake Thornton, who's this you're bringing to my door after sunset?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "This is Miss Blackwood," Jake explained. "Just arrived on the evening stage. Looking for work and a place to stay tonight." Mrs. Pearson's eyes softened slightly at Zara's obvious state of fatigue. "I've got one room left. 50 cents for the night. Includes breakfast." Zara reached for her meager funds, but Jake's hand gently stopped her. "Put it on my account, Mrs. Pearson. Miss Blackwood's going to be the new cook out at Double T starting tomorrow." The widow's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Well now, that's interesting." She looked at Zara with new interest. "Come in, dear. You look like you could use a hot meal and a bath." Jake tipped his hat. "I'll be by at first light, Miss Blackwood. Rest well." As he turned to leave, Zara called after him, "Mr. Thornton?" He paused, looking back at her over his shoulder. "Thank you," she said simply. He nodded once and strode away into the gathering darkness, his figure silhouetted against the lantern-lit windows of the saloon down the street. Inside, Mrs. Pearson led Zara to a small but clean room on the second floor. "Bathrooms down the hall. I'll heat some water for you." "I don't want to be any trouble," Zara protested weakly. "Nonsense. No woman should start a new job without washing the dust of the road away first." Mrs. Pearson paused at the door. "Jake Thornton's a good man. Best rancher in these parts. Lost his wife to fever 3 years back. Hasn't been the same since, but he's fair and decent. You could do worse for an employer." Alone in the small room, Zara sank onto the edge of the narrow bed. She had traveled over 1,000 miles to escape her past, and now she found herself headed to a remote ranch with a man she'd just met. But something about Jake Thornton's steady gaze and straightforward manner had seemed trustworthy in a way she'd learned to recognize. After a bath that washed away days of travel grime, Zara changed into her only other dress, a simple blue cotton that had seen better days but was at least clean. Mrs. Pearson provided a simple but hearty meal of beef stew and fresh bread, which Zara ate gratefully at the kitchen table. "Not many single women come to Promise Creek on their own," Mrs. Pearson remarked as she poured Zara a cup of tea. Zara tensed, preparing for questions she couldn't answer. But the widow simply added, "Must take a special kind of courage." "Or desperation," Zara murmured. Mrs. Pearson's kind eyes met hers. "Sometimes they're the same thing, dear." That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Zara listened to the distant piano music from the saloon and the occasional shout or laughter from the street below. Promise Creek was a far cry from Boston's fashionable neighborhoods, but for the first time in months, she felt the tight knot of fear in her chest begin to loosen. Tomorrow would bring a new challenge, proving herself valuable enough to keep this lifeline Jake Thornton had unexpectedly offered. As she drifted towards sleep, Zara promised herself that whatever happened, she would never again be at the mercy of a man's cruelty. She had come to Wyoming territory with nothing but her name, and she intended to make that name mean something new. True to his word, Jake Thornton arrived at first light. Zara was already awake, having slept fitfully in the strange bed. She had packed her few belongings and was waiting in the boarding house parlor, dressed in her blue dress with her hair neatly pinned back. "Morning, Miss Blackwood," Jake said, removing his hat as he entered. Ready to see what you've gotten yourself into? Despite his teasing tone, Zara noted that his eyes looked as tired as she felt. Had he slept as poorly as she had? I am, she replied with more confidence than she felt, after a quick breakfast of Mrs. Pearson's biscuits and coffee. Zara found herself being helped up onto the bench of a wagon loaded with supplies from the general store. Ranch is about 10 miles out, Jake explained as he flicked the reins to set the horses in motion. We come to town for supplies every couple weeks, more often if needed. As the wagon rumbled out of Promise Creek, Zara watched the small cluster of buildings recede behind them. Ahead stretched an expanse of rugged landscape, rolling hills dotted with sagebrush, stands of pine trees on distant ridges, and beyond them, the majestic silhouette of mountains rising against the brilliant blue sky. It's beautiful, she breathed, the vastness of it making her feel both insignificant and somehow free. Jake glanced at her, a hint of pride in his expression. Most Easterners think Wyoming's nothing but emptiness, but there's more life out here than meets the eye. As if to prove his point, a small herd of pronghorn antelope appeared on a nearby ridge, their white rumps flashing as they bounded away from the approaching wagon. I've never seen anything like them, Zara said, watching in wonder. Fastest animals in North America, Jake told her. Can outrun any horse over distance. The journey to the Double T Ranch gave Zara time to study her new employer. In the morning light, she could see the lines of fatigue and responsibility etched into his face. Yet there was a quiet strength about him that was reassuring. His hands, rough and calloused, handled the reins with practiced ease. Occasionally, he would point out landmarks or wildlife, his deep voice rumbling pleasantly beside her. The Double T's been in my family for 15 years, he explained as they crested a hill that revealed a sweeping valley below. My father brought us out from Missouri after the war. Started with nothing but 100 acres and a dream. And now? Zara asked. Now we run cattle on nearly 2,000 acres. Not the biggest spread in Wyoming, but it's good land with reliable water. He pointed to the cluster of buildings nestled against a backdrop of cottonwood trees in the distance. Home. As they drew closer, Zara could make out a substantial main house built of logs, a large barn, bunkhouse, and several smaller outbuildings. A corral held several horses, and beyond the immediate compound, cattle grazed on the open range. It's impressive, she said sincerely. Jake's expression softened with affection for his home. My father built that main house by hand, added on to it 3 times as the family grew. After he passed 4 years ago, it became mine to protect and build on. They pulled up in front of the main house, and Jake set the brake on the wagon. Before he could come around to help her down, a young boy of about 12 came running from the direction of the barn. Uncle Jake, did you bring the new rifle sights? The boy called excitedly, then skidded to a stop when he noticed Zara. Who's this? Joshua, mind your manners, Jake admonished gently. This is Miss Blackwood. She's our new cook. Miss Blackwood, this is my nephew, Joshua. The boy looked at her with frank curiosity. Can you make apple pie? Mr. Chun could make the best apple pie, but he left to get married. Despite her nerves, Zara found herself smiling. I do make a very good apple pie as it happens. Joshua's face lit up. Uncle Jake, you finally did something right. Jake cuffed the boy lightly on the shoulder. Go tell your mother we're back and have a guest. And yes, your rifle sights are in the supplies. As Joshua dashed toward the house, Jake helped Zara down from the wagon. My sister-in-law Sarah and her 3 children live with me, he explained. My brother Daniel was killed in a stampede 2 years ago. The family works the ranch together. Before Zara could respond, a slender woman with auburn hair appeared on the porch of the main house. Her simple calico dress was neat but showed signs of mending, and her face, though strained, brightened at the sight of Jake. "Welcome back," she called. "I see you've brought company." Jake led Zara forward. "Sarah, this is Miss Zara Blackwood. She's agreed to take over the cooking duties." "Miss Blackwood, my sister-in-law, Sarah Thornton." Sarah's eyes widened slightly in surprise, but she quickly composed her features into a welcoming smile. "Thank the Lord. If we had to eat Jake's cooking one more day, we might have all perished." Jake's indignant, "It wasn't that bad," made both women smile. "Let me show you to the cookhouse," Sarah offered. "You must be tired from your journey." The cookhouse was a separate building positioned between the main house and the bunkhouse. Inside, Zara found a large cast-iron stove, a substantial work table, shelves of provisions, and a small adjoining room with a narrow bed, chest of drawers, and a small window overlooking a kitchen garden. "The men take their meals here," Sarah explained, gesturing to the long table with benches on either side that occupied much of the main space. "Breakfast at sunrise, dinner at noon, supper after the day's work. The family eats at the main house, but you'll prepare those meals as well." Zara's mind was already cataloging the available provisions and planning menus. "How many in total will I be cooking for?" 12 ranch hands, Jake, myself, and the children Joshua, Emma, who's 10, and little Daniel, who's 6. Sarah paused. "It's a lot of work, Miss Blackwood. Are you certain you're up to it?" Zara met the other woman's concerned gaze steadily. "Mrs. Thornton, I may not look it, but I'm no stranger to hard work. I'm grateful for this opportunity, and I won't let you down." Something in her tone must have convinced Sarah, who nodded slowly. "Well then, I'll help you get settled. The men will be coming in hungry in about 2 hours. Think you can have something ready by then?" "I'll manage," Zara promised, already rolling up her sleeves. By the time the ranch hands began filing into the cookhouse for the midday meal, Zara had prepared a hearty beef stew using ingredients she'd found in the storehouse, along with fresh biscuits and apple tarts made from the last of the previous season's preserved apples. The men, a diverse group ranging from grizzled veterans to young cowboys barely out of their teens, regarded her with surprise and undisguised curiosity. Jake introduced her simply as Miss Blackwood, our new cook, and the men nodded respectfully, though Zara could sense their skepticism. That skepticism evaporated with the first taste of her cooking. Zara watched with satisfaction as the initial tentative bites gave way to enthusiastic eating. The table soon filled with the sounds of appreciation and requests for seconds. "Miss Blackwood," said one of the older hands, a weathered man introduced as Hank, "if you cook like this every day, we might never leave the ranch again." A ripple of laughter and agreement went around the table. Jake, seated at the head, caught Zara's eye and gave her a slight nod of approval that inexplicably warmed her more than the men's vocal praise. The routine of ranch life quickly absorbed Zara. She rose before dawn to start breakfast, worked through the day preparing meals, baking bread, preserving foods, and tending the kitchen garden, finally collapsing into her narrow bed long after sunset. The work was exhausting but satisfying in a way her previous life had never been. Here, her contributions were tangible, visible in the clean plates and the appreciative nods from men too tired for many words after a long day's work. Sarah proved to be a valuable ally, sharing the ranch's routines and helping Zara adjust to the rhythm of life at Double T. The children, initially shy, soon warmed to her, especially after she taught Emma how to make sugar cookies cut into the shapes of horses and stars. Jake himself remained something of a mystery. He took his meals either with the men or with his family, always thanking Zara politely for her efforts, but rarely engaging in conversation beyond necessary ranch business. Yet she often caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, not inappropriate or threatening, but thoughtful, as though he was trying to solve a puzzle. 2 weeks after her arrival, Zara was kneading bread dough in the early morning stillness when a knock at the cookhouse door startled her. Jake stood there, already dressed for the day's work, his hat in his hands. "Miss Blackwood, I'm heading into town today for supplies. Thought you might want to come along. Get things you need." Zara wiped flour from her hands. "That would be helpful, thank you. There are several items we're running low on." "We'll leave after breakfast," he said, then hesitated. "The men have nothing but good things to say about your cooking. Even old Hank, who's complained about every meal since I've known him." Zara felt a flush of pleasure at the compliment. "Thank you. I enjoy the work." Jake nodded, seemingly about to leave, then paused again. "Miss Blackwood." "Zara," he said, using her first name for the first time. "I know it's not my place to ask, but I can't help wondering what brought you to Promise Creek. A woman with your refinement." The question caught Zara off guard. She'd been so focused on proving herself useful that she'd almost forgotten the secrets she carried. "Almost. I needed a fresh start," she said carefully. "Sometimes the past is best left behind." Jake studied her face, his blue eyes seeing too much. "Those bruises you had when you arrived, they're healing well." Zara unconsciously touched her cheek, now clear of marks. "Yes. Whoever put them there," Jake said, his voice low and controlled. "I hope they're far away from here." The concern in his voice made something twist in Zara's chest. "They are." Jake nodded once, seemingly satisfied. "Good. I'll see you after breakfast then." As he strode away toward the barn, Zara found herself watching his retreating figure longer than necessary. There was something about Jake Thornton, a fundamental decency wrapped in that rugged exterior that made her wonder if perhaps not all men were like the one she'd fled. The trip to Promise Creek gave Zara a chance to see more of the surrounding countryside in the full light of day. Spring was yielding to summer, and wildflowers dotted the prairie in splashes of yellow, purple, and white. In town, Jake efficiently conducted his business while Zara selected provisions for the kitchen. She was examining bags of flour at the general store when a commotion outside drew her attention. Through the window, she saw a well-dressed man dismounting from an expensive-looking horse. Something about his posture, the entitled tilt of his head, the impatient gesture to a store clerk sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with recognition. She didn't know this particular man, but she knew his type all too well. "That's Edwin Porter," said Mrs. Jenkins, the storekeeper's wife who was helping Zara with her order. "Owns the largest cattle operation north of Cheyenne. Stopping through on his way to a meeting with other big ranchers, I expect." Zara nodded absently, relieved when the man disappeared into the hotel across the street. She finished her shopping quickly, wanting suddenly to return to the safety of Double T. Jake was loading the last of the supplies when she rejoined him. "Got everything you need?" "Yes, thank you," she replied, unable to keep a slight tremor from her voice. Jake's gaze sharpened. "Something wrong?" "No, I'm just tired," she lied, forcing a smile. "It's been a busy morning." He didn't look convinced but didn't press the issue, helping her up onto the wagon seat instead. As they pulled away from town, Zara felt herself relaxing with each mile that separated them from Promise Creek. They were about halfway back to the ranch when Jake unexpectedly guided the wagon off the main trail toward a small creek lined with cottonwood trees. "Thought the horses could use a drink," he explained, bringing the team to a halt in the dappled shade. "And it's a good spot for lunch. Sarah packed us something." Indeed, Zara discovered that Sarah had included a basket containing cold chicken, bread, cheese, and apple tarts that Zara herself had baked the previous day. They sat on a fallen log near the creek, the gentle gurgle of water and rustling leaves creating a peaceful backdrop to their meal. For several minutes, they ate in companionable silence, until Jake finally spoke. "My wife Elizabeth loved this spot," he said quietly. "Used to say it was like God had created a little piece of heaven just for Wyoming." Zara glanced at him, surprised by the personal revelation. Mrs. Pearson mentioned you'd lost your wife. I'm sorry. Jake nodded, his gaze on the rippling water. 3 years ago, fever took her in less than a week. Nothing the doctor could do. That must have been devastating, Zara said softly. It was like the sun went out, Jake admitted, his voice rough with emotion. Elizabeth was the light of the ranch. Always laughing, making plans, dreaming big. She's the one who planted the orchard behind the main house. Said we'd need apples for pies when we had children. The raw grief in his voice touched something in Zara. Did you have children? Jake shook his head. We'd been trying. That's part of what made losing her so hard, all those dreams that died with her. He glanced at Zara, a hint of embarrassment crossing his features. I'm sorry. I don't usually talk about this. Please don't apologize, Zara said. It helps sometimes to speak of those we've lost. A question hovered in Jake's eyes. You've lost someone too? Zara hesitated, then decided to offer a piece of her truth. My parents when I was 18. Influenza. I had to make my own way after that. It wasn't the whole story, not by far, but it was true as far as it went. That couldn't have been easy for a young woman alone, Jake observed. No, Zara agreed quietly. It wasn't. Jake seemed to sense her reluctance to elaborate. Well, I'm glad your path led you to Double T, however it happened. The ranch hasn't felt this alive in a long time. The sincerity in his voice made Zara look up, meeting his gaze. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps of shared loss and the tentative hope of something new. The moment was broken by one of the horses nickering softly, and Jake stood, brushing crumbs from his trousers. We should head back. Storm clouds building to the west. Indeed, dark thunderheads were gathering on the horizon, promising an afternoon downpour. They packed up quickly and resumed their journey, reaching the ranch just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. That evening, as Zara prepared supper in the cookhouse with rain drumming on the roof, she found herself thinking about Jake's words. The ranch hadn't felt this alive in a long time, he'd said. But neither had she. For the first time since fleeing Boston, Zara allowed herself to imagine a future not just surviving day to day, but perhaps building something permanent here in this wild, beautiful place. It was a dangerous thought. Her past could still find her. But as she kneaded biscuit dough with strong, capable hands that bore the honest calluses of hard work, Zara permitted herself a small smile. Perhaps Promise Creek would live up to its name after all. The summer days settled into a rhythm at Double T Ranch. Zara's cooking continued to win praise, and she gradually expanded her responsibilities to include helping Sarah with household management and teaching Emma basic cooking skills. The girl proved an eager student, soaking up Zara's knowledge of how to make a perfect pie crust or turn simple ingredients into something special. Jake, though still reserved, began to seek out Zara's company more frequently. Sometimes he would arrive at the cookhouse early for breakfast, sitting quietly at the table with a cup of coffee while she worked, discussing ranch business or simply sharing the peaceful morning moments before the day's demands began. Other times, he would linger after the evening meal, helping her clean up when the ranch hands had departed for the bunkhouse. These quiet moments together revealed a thoughtful, intelligent man beneath the rugged exterior, a man who read Shakespeare by lamplight and subscribed to newspapers from as far away as Denver and Chicago to keep abreast of the wider world. Did you always want to be a rancher? Zara asked one evening as they washed dishes side by side. Jake considered the question. Not always. I had notions of becoming a lawyer when I was younger. Even studied some law books my father brought west with us. What changed your mind? My father needed help with the ranch. And then I realized I loved this life, the freedom of it, working with the land, seeing something you've built with your own hands. Jake passed her a plate to dry. What about you? Did you always want to be a cook? Zara smiled slightly. Actually, no. In my parents' home, cooking was servants' work. Jake raised an eyebrow. So your family was well off? Comfortable, Zara amended, careful not to reveal too much. But after they died, circumstances changed. I discovered I had a talent for cooking, and it became a way to support myself. Jake nodded, not pressing for details she wasn't offering. Life has a way of taking unexpected turns. Yes, Zara agreed softly. It certainly does. Their growing closeness didn't go unnoticed. Sarah watched with knowing eyes but said nothing, while the ranch hands exchanged meaningful glances when Jake lingered at the cookhouse. Even young Joshua remarked innocently one day, "Uncle Jake smiles a lot more since Miss Blackwood came." July brought scorching heat and the annual county fair in Promise Creek. The entire Double T household planned to attend, and Zara found herself looking forward to the outing despite her usual caution about appearing in public. The day of the fair dawned bright and clear. Zara wore her blue dress, freshly washed and mended, with her dark hair arranged in a simple but flattering style. When Jake saw her climbing into the wagon, he paused, hat in hand. "You look lovely, Miss Blackwood," he said, the formality of a dress at odds with the warmth in his eyes. "Thank you," she replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. "And please, after all this time, I think you could call me Zara." A slow smile spread across his face. Zara, then. The fair transformed Promise Creek from a quiet frontier town into a bustling center of activity. Farmers and ranchers from miles around had gathered to compete, trade, socialize, and enjoy a rare day of leisure. Colorful bunting decorated the main street, and the smell of barbecue and sweet treats filled the air. The children ran ahead eagerly, pointing out attractions and begging to try games of skill and chance. Sarah followed at a more sedate pace, greeting acquaintances and neighbors with warm familiarity. "Would you like to walk with me?" Jake asked Zara, offering his arm in a gentlemanly gesture that surprised her. She hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in the crook of his elbow. "I would like that very much." They strolled through the fairgrounds, stopping to admire prized livestock, handcrafted goods, and impressive displays of preserved foods. Jake seemed to know everyone, introducing Zara simply as Miss Blackwood from Double T, a designation that filled her with an unexpected sense of belonging. At the pie contest, Jake insisted Zara should enter one of her apple pies. "You'd win for certain," he declared. "Best pie I've ever tasted." "Perhaps next year," she demurred, unwilling to draw attention to herself by competing. They watched the horse races together, Jake explaining the finer points of each animal's strengths and weaknesses with the expertise of someone who had spent his life working with horses. When the local cowboys participated in a roping competition, Jake joined in at his men's urging, displaying a skill that impressed even Zara, who had seen him work with cattle at the ranch. As afternoon turned to evening, musicians began setting up for the dance that would conclude the fair. Lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the temporary dance floor constructed in the town square. "Will you dance with me, Zara?" Jake asked, his voice low near her ear. The idea both thrilled and terrified her. Dancing meant closeness, visibility. But the warmth in Jake's blue eyes melted her resistance. "Yes," she answered simply. The musicians struck up a lively tune, and Jake led her onto the floor. He was a surprisingly graceful dancer for such a tall, powerful man, guiding her confidently through the steps. Zara found herself relaxing into his arms, enjoying the sensation of being held by someone who made her feel safe rather than threatened. As the music slowed to a waltz, Jake drew her closer. "You dance beautifully," he murmured. "Another talent you didn't mention." "There are many things we haven't told each other," Zara replied, more candid than she had intended. Jake's gaze intensified. "I'd like to know everything about you, Zara Blackwood." The sincerity in his voice made her heart race with both longing and fear. How would he look at her if he knew the whole truth? Before she could respond, a commotion at the edge of the dance floor caught their attention. A group of well-dressed men had entered the square, their expensive clothes and confident bearing marking them as outsiders. With a jolt of recognition that felt like ice water in her veins, Zara spotted Edwin Porter among them. "The cattle barons," Jake explained, noticing her attention shift. "In town for their association meeting. Porter, Fleming, and Reynolds own half the grazing land in the territory between them." Zara turned her face away, using Jake's broad shoulders to shield herself from view. "Could we step outside for a moment? It's rather warm in here." Concern flickered across Jake's features, but he nodded, guiding her through the crowd toward the exit. They had almost reached the door when a booming voice called out, "Thornton, just the man I wanted to see." Jake paused, turning reluctantly. "Mr. Porter." The well-dressed man approached, flanked by two companions equally finely attired. "That water rights proposal you submitted to the association, it's causing quite a stir." "It's only fair that smaller ranchers have equal access," Jake replied evenly. Porter's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Fair is a matter of perspective, wouldn't you say?" His gaze slid to Zara, and she felt her stomach clench with anxiety. "Won't you introduce your lovely partner?" Jake's arm tightened protectively around Zara's waist. "Miss Blackwood, this is Edwin Porter, Thomas Fleming, and James Reynolds. Gentlemen, Miss Zara Blackwood." Zara forced herself to nod politely while keeping her face partially averted. "Pleased to meet you." Porter studied her with narrowed eyes. "Miss Blackwood, have we met before? You seem familiar." "I don't believe so, sir," Zara replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I'm relatively new to Wyoming territory. Where are you from originally?" Fleming asked, his tone casual but his gaze assessing. "We should be going," Jake interjected before Zara could answer. "Sarah will be looking for us to help with the children. Gentlemen, enjoy your evening." He guided Zara away firmly, his hand warm and reassuring against her back. Once outside in the cool night air, he turned to her with concern. "Are you all right? You're trembling." "Just tired," she lied, wrapping her arms around herself. "It's been a long day." Jake didn't appear convinced. "Did Porter say something to upset you? The man can be intimidating, I know." "No, nothing like that," Zara assured him. "I'm simply not accustomed to such crowds anymore." Jake studied her face in the silvery moonlight. "Zara, if something's troubling you, you can tell me. Whatever it is, I'd like to help." For one wild moment, Zara considered telling him everything about her wealthy family in Boston, her marriage at 19 to Charles Harrington, a man twice her age whose charming facade had hidden a monster, the years of escalating abuse behind closed doors, and finally her desperate flight west when she discovered his plans to commit her to an asylum to silence her complaints permanently. But fear held her tongue. Not just fear of Charles finding her, but fear of losing Jake's respect. What would this honorable man think of her if he knew she was a runaway wife? That legally she belonged to another man? "Thank you," she said instead. "But I'm truly fine. Perhaps we should find Sarah and the children. It is getting late." Jake hesitated, clearly wanting to say more, but finally nodded. "All right, but Zara." He took her hand gently in his. "When you're ready to talk, I'll be ready to listen." The tenderness in his voice nearly undid her. Zara squeezed his hand in silent acknowledgement, then released it as they went to collect the rest of the family. The journey back to Double T was subdued, the children drowsy from a day of excitement, Sarah and Jake discussing the fair's events in low voices. Zara sat quietly, her mind racing with new fears. Porter had seemed to almost recognize her. Had Charles circulated her description to his business associates? Was her safety at Double T now compromised? That night, sleep eluded her. Zara paced her small room in the cookhouse, weighing her options. She could leave immediately, push further west where no one would find her. But the thought of abandoning the life she'd built at Double T, of never seeing Jake again, created a physical ache in her chest. Dawn found her exhausted but resolved. She would stay, at least for now, but redouble her caution when venturing into town. Double T had become her home, and Jake. Jake had become far more important to her than she had ever intended to allow. The weeks following the fair brought increased tension to Double T Ranch. Jake spent long hours in meetings with neighboring small ranchers, discussing water rights and grazing access that the large cattle operations sought to restrict. When he returned home in the evenings, his expression was often grim, his shoulders tense with worry. The association's pushing through new rules that would essentially fence us out of the best grazing lands. He explained to Zara one evening as they sat on the porch of the main house after the children had gone to bed. Sarah had retired early with a headache, leaving them alone in the soft summer darkness. "Can they do that?" Zara asked, concerned by the strain evident in his voice. Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. "They have money and political connections. But we smaller ranchers are organizing. There's strength in numbers. Is it dangerous?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, revealing more of her feelings than she had intended. In the lantern light, Jake's eyes softened as they met hers. "Are you worried about me, Zara Blackwood?" "The ranch needs you," she replied, attempting to deflect. "The family needs you." Jake reached across the space between their chairs, taking her hand in his. "And what about you? Do you need me too?" The directness of the question stole her breath. In the 3 months since she had arrived at Double T, Zara had tried to maintain emotional distance, knowing her past made any attachment dangerous and unfair. But despite her best efforts, Jake Thornton had worked his way into her heart with his quiet strength, his kindness, and his unwavering integrity. "I shouldn't," she whispered, not pulling her hand away. "But do you?" he persisted gently. Zara looked at their joined hands, his large and work-roughened, hers smaller but equally marked by honest labor. "Yes," she admitted finally. "I do." Jake's thumb traced gentle circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. "I've been alone a long time, Zara. After Elizabeth died, I never thought I'd feel this way again. But from the moment you stepped off that stagecoach, something changed." "Jake," she began, heart racing, "there are things about me, about my past, that you don't know." "We all have pasts," he said simply. "It's the future I'm interested in, a future with you in it." The tenderness in his voice nearly undid her. "It's not that simple." "It could be," Jake suggested, leaning closer, "if we want it to be." In the warm summer night, with crickets singing and distant coyotes calling, Zara felt the walls she had built around her heart beginning to crumble. When Jake's free hand gently cupped her cheek, she didn't pull away. "May I kiss you, Zara?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that she felt more than heard. Instead of answering, she closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened into something that made her forget everything but the feel of him, the scent of leather and pine that clung to his skin, and the gentle strength with which he held her. When they finally parted, both breathless, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you, Zara Blackwood. I think I have been since the day you arrived." The words both thrilled and terrified her. "Jake, please. I need time. There are complications." "Take all the time you need," he assured her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm not going anywhere." Later that night, alone in her room at the cookhouse, Zara touched her fingers to her lips, still feeling the imprint of Jake's kiss. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life where she was truly free to love, to build a future, to become Zara Thornton instead of the frightened woman who had fled Boston with nothing but her name. But such dreams were dangerous. Charles Harrington was not a man who would simply let her disappear, if he ever found her. Zara shuddered at the thought. She couldn't put Jake and his family at risk. And yet, the thought of leaving Double T, of never seeing Jake again, was becoming increasingly unbearable. She needed to tell him the truth. All of it. He deserved that much, even if it meant losing him. Decision made, Zara resolved to speak with Jake the following day, whatever the consequences might be. But fate had other plans. The next morning dawned hot and still, the air heavy with the promise of a summer storm. Zara was preparing breakfast when Joshua burst into the cookhouse, his young face flushed with excitement. "Miss Blackwood, there's a fancy carriage coming up the road, with a city driver and everything." Zara's hand froze in the act of stirring porridge. "A carriage? Are you certain?" "Yes, madam. Uncle Jake sent me to tell you and Mama that we have visitors coming." A cold dread settled in Zara's stomach. Carriages were rare in this part of Wyoming, where most people traveled by horseback or wagon. Only someone of considerable means would arrive in such a fashion. "Thank you, Joshua," she managed. "Please tell your uncle I'll have coffee and refreshments ready shortly." The boy dashed off, leaving Zara gripping the edge of the stove for support. It could be innocent, a traveling businessman, perhaps, or a wealthy rancher. But instinct told her otherwise. With trembling hands, she prepared a tray with coffee and the cinnamon rolls she had baked the previous day. By the time she carried it to the main house, the carriage had arrived, and voices could be heard from the parlor. Sarah met her in the hallway, her expression troubled. "It's that Edwin Porter from the fair, with another gentleman I don't recognize. They're asking for Jake." Zara set the tray down on a side table, suddenly feeling light-headed. "What do they want?" "Something about water rights, I think," Sarah replied. "But the other man, he keeps looking around as if he's searching for something. Or someone." With a sense of inevitability, Zara picked up the tray again. "I'll take this in." "Are you sure?" "I could." "It's fine," Zara interrupted gently. "I need to do this." Taking a deep breath, she entered the parlor. Jake stood near the fireplace, his stance rigid with tension as he faced Porter and another man whose back was to the door. At her entrance, all three men turned. The coffee tray nearly slipped from Zara's hands as she found herself staring into the cold gray eyes of Charles Harrington. "Ah," Charles said, his cultured Boston accent incongruous in the Wyoming ranch house. "There you are, my dear. I've been looking everywhere for you." Jake's gaze darted between them, confusion evident in his expression. "You know each other?" Charles stepped forward, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Know each other? My dear man, this is my wife, Caroline Harrington." The silence that followed was deafening. Zara stood frozen, the tray clutched in white-knuckled hands, as Jake's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, and finally to a pain that cut her to the core. "Zara?" he asked quietly, the single word holding a wealth of questions. "How touching," Charles commented, his tone conversational but his eyes hard. "She's even taken a new name. Always had a flair for the dramatic, my Caroline." "My name is Zara now," she said, finding her voice at last. With deliberate calm, she set the tray on a nearby table. "And I am not going back with you, Charles." Charles's expression hardened. "I'm afraid you don't have a choice. A wife belongs with her husband. The law is quite clear on that point." Jake moved to stand beside Zara, his presence solid and reassuring despite the hurt evident in his eyes. Miss Blackwood or Mrs. Harrington is welcome at Double T for as long as she wishes to stay. How gallant, Charles sneered. But I wonder if you'd be so quick to harbor her if you knew she absconded with family jewelry worth thousands of dollars? Or that she's been diagnosed with hysteria and delusions by Boston's finest doctors. That's a lie, Zara exclaimed, anger overriding her fear. I took nothing but what was rightfully mine, my mother's hairbrush and my own earnings. And those doctors were your friends, paid to say whatever you wanted. Charles's smile was cold. You see? Paranoid delusions, just as the doctor said. Caroline, dear, you're unwell. I've come to take you home where you can receive proper care. I think, Jake said, his voice dangerously quiet, that you should leave my property, Mr. Harrington. Porter, who had been watching the exchange with evident interest, stepped forward. Careful, Thornton. Interfering with a man's legal right to his wife could have consequences, especially for a rancher already on thin ice with the Cattlemen's Association. The threat was unmistakable. Zara looked at Jake, seeing the conflict in his eyes, his personal feelings warring with his responsibility to protect his family and the ranch. It's all right, Jake, she said softly. This isn't your fight. The hell it isn't, he replied, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Then, louder, to Charles and Porter, I'd like a moment alone with Miss Blackwood, if you gentlemen don't mind. Mrs. Harrington, Charles corrected coldly. And I mind very much. Caroline, get your things. We're leaving immediately. No. The word came from Jake, simple but immovable as the mountains themselves. She's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go. Charles's face flushed with anger. I'll have the sheriff here by nightfall. You'll be arrested for harboring my wife against my will. Do that, Jake challenged. Sheriff Thompson is a fair man. I think he'd be interested to hear why Mrs. Harrington felt the need to flee across the country from her loving husband. A tense silence followed, broken finally by Porter. Perhaps we should all take a moment to calm down. Thornton, a word in private. Jake hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave Zara alone with Charles. It's all right, she assured him. I'll go to the kitchen with Sarah. After a moment's consideration, Jake nodded. We'll talk in my study, Porter. Mr. Harrington can wait on the porch. Charles looked as though he might object, but something in Jake's expression made him reconsider. With a curt nod, he strode out to the porch, his rigid posture broadcasting his fury. In the kitchen, Zara found Sarah waiting anxiously. I heard, the other woman said simply. Are you truly married to that man? Yes, Zara admitted, sinking into a chair. But I fled for good reason, Sarah. Her voice faltered. Sarah's hand covered hers. You don't need to explain. I saw how he looked at you like you were property, not a person. Tears of gratitude filled Zara's eyes. I should have told Jake the truth from the beginning. Now I've put all of you in danger. Jake's a grown man who makes his own decisions, Sarah said firmly. And I've seen how he looks at you very differently than that husband of yours. Before Zara could respond, the back door opened and Jake entered, his expression grim but determined. Porter's taking Harrington back to town, he announced. They'll be staying at the hotel tonight. Relief flooded Zara, quickly followed by apprehension. But they'll be back. Yes, Jake acknowledged. Porter made it clear that if we don't resolve this situation, the Cattlemen's Association will ensure Double T loses access to the North pasture water rights. Without that water, the ranch couldn't sustain your herd, Zara finished, understanding the gravity of the threat. Jake, I'm so sorry. I never meant to bring this trouble to your door. Sarah quietly excused herself, leaving them alone in the kitchen. Jake took the seat across from Zara, his blue eyes serious but not condemning. Why didn't you tell me you were married? He asked simply. Zara's hands twisted together in her lap. I was afraid. Afraid you wouldn't understand. Afraid Charles would find me. She took a deep breath. Afraid of losing what I found here. Tell me now, Jake requested. All of it. And so she did. The words poured out of her, the arranged marriage to a man her father's age when her family's finances faltered, the gradual revelation of Charles's true nature behind closed doors, the escalating abuse hidden from Boston society, and finally the overheard conversation between Charles and a doctor discussing her treatment in an asylum where troublesome wives often disappeared. I ran that night, she concluded, her voice hoarse from talking. Took what little money I had saved and the few items that were truly mine. I traveled west because I knew Charles had few connections here. When I reached Promise Creek, I had nothing left but my new name, Zara Blackwood. Jake had listened without interruption, his expression darkening at certain parts of her story. Now he reached across the table, taking her hands in his. You should have told me, he said, not unkindly. I would have protected you from the beginning. I couldn't risk involving you, Zara replied. And now I've done exactly that. Jake, I should leave. If I go, Charles will follow me and leave Double T alone. Jake's grip on her hands tightened. Is that what you want? To leave? No, she whispered, the truth of it aching in her chest. Double T has become my home. You, Sarah, the children, you've become my family. But I won't be responsible for you losing everything your father built. Jake was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand in a gesture that had become familiar and dear to her. There might be another way, he said finally. What do you mean? Wyoming territory has the most progressive divorce laws in the country, Jake explained. A woman can file on grounds of cruelty without her husband's consent. With testimony about Harrington's treatment of you. Hope flickered in Zara's heart, quickly extinguished. Charles would never allow it. He'd contest it. Bring doctors to testify that I'm mentally unstable. Let him try, Jake said, a fierce protectiveness in his voice that warmed her despite everything. The judges here aren't easily swayed by Eastern money. And you'd have witnesses to your character now, everyone at Double T, Widow Pearson. Half the town that's eaten your cooking at socials. Even if that worked, Zara said hesitantly, Porter's threat remains. The water rights. Jake's expression hardened with resolve. I've been fighting the association for months. This changes nothing except my determination to win. Jake. Zara hesitated, needing to ask but afraid of the answer. What Porter said about harboring another man's wife. About us. Do you love him? Jake asked abruptly. No, Zara replied without hesitation. I never did. It was a marriage of financial convenience for my family. And me. Jake's voice softened, vulnerability showing through his strength. After last night, after everything you've heard today. What do you feel for me, Zara? The question stripped away her last defenses. I love you, she admitted, the words both frightening and freeing. I've tried not to, knowing what complications my past would bring. But I do love you, Jake Thornton. The smile that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Then that's all that matters. The rest we'll figure out together. He stood, drawing her up with him, and gathered her gently into his arms. Zara went willingly, resting her head against his chest, finding solace in the steady beat of his heart. I won't let him take you, Jake murmured into her hair. I promise you that, Zara. For the first time since fleeing Boston, Zara allowed herself to believe that she might truly be safe not because she was hidden, but because she was protected by a love stronger than fear. The next morning, Jake rode into Promise Creek alone, despite Zara's protests. I need to speak with Sheriff Thompson before Harrington does, he explained. and talk to Judge Wilson about filing divorce papers. Let me come with you, Zara urged. This is my fight. Jake shook his head. Not today. I don't trust Harrington not to try to force you to return with him. Stay here with Sarah and the children. I'll be back by evening. Reluctantly, Zara agreed, watching from the porch as he rode away, his tall figure straight and determined in the saddle. The day passed with excruciating slowness. Zara went through the motions of her usual routine, preparing meals for the ranch hands who treated her with the same respect as always. Having been briefly informed by Jake that Miss Blackwood has some trouble from back east that we're helping her with. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, promising a violent summer thunderstorm. Sarah kept the children close to the house, watching the road anxiously for Jake's return. He should have been back by now, she fretted, standing beside Zara at the kitchen window. Unless something's delayed him. Or someone, Zara added, voicing the fear they both shared. The first heavy raindrops were just beginning to fall when they heard the sound of approaching horses, multiple horses, not just Jake's gelding. Sarah grabbed the rifle kept over the kitchen door, checking that it was loaded before moving to the front of the house. Stay with the children, she instructed Zara. If there's trouble, take them out the back and go to the north pasture line shack. The men will be bringing the herd in because of the storm. They'll find you there. I'm not leaving you alone, Zara protested. Sarah's expression softened briefly. You're family now, Zara, and we protect family at Double T. Before Zara could argue further, the sound of horses stopping in the yard drew their attention. Sarah moved to the window, peering out cautiously. It's Jake, she reported with relief. And Sheriff Thompson. And Judge Wilson. Her brow furrowed in confusion. Why would the judge come all this way in a storm? They hurried to the door as the men dismounted, rain beginning to fall in earnest. Jake's face, when he entered, was a mixture of grim determination and something else Zara couldn't quite read. Sheriff, Sarah greeted, setting aside the rifle. Judge, this is unexpected. Sheriff Thompson, a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes that belied his tough reputation, nodded respectfully. Mrs. Thornton, Miss Blackwood. Judge Wilson, equally gray but with a scholarly bearing, shook rain from his hat. Apologies for arriving unannounced. The matter seemed urgent. Jake stepped forward, taking Zara's hand. Harrington and Porter were at the hotel when I reached town. They've made their position clear. Either you return to Boston with Harrington, or Porter will ensure Double T loses its water rights and, effectively, its future. Zara's heart sank. Then I have no choice. I can't let you lose everything because of me. There's always a choice, Jake said firmly. I spoke with Judge Wilson about filing for divorce. Given the circumstances, he agrees there are grounds. The judge nodded. Abandonment and cruelty are sufficient cause under territorial law. However, he added, his expression grave, Mr. Harrington has already contested the jurisdiction, claiming that as a Massachusetts resident, his wife's marital status should be determined by Massachusetts courts, which don't allow divorce except in the most extreme circumstances, Zara said bitterly. And a husband's word carries more weight than a wife's. That's true, Judge Wilson acknowledged. It creates a complex legal situation that could take months, even years, to resolve. We don't have months, Jake said. Porter's pushing for an association vote on water rights next week. Sheriff Thompson cleared his throat. There's also the matter of Mr. Harrington's claims that you're harboring his wife against his will, Thornton. Without a legal separation or divorce, his claim has merit under the law. The rain lashed against the windows, matching the storm of emotions in Zara's heart. Everything she had feared was coming to pass, her past catching up with her. threatening not just her freedom but Jake's livelihood and his family's security. "There is another option," Judge Wilson said carefully. "One that might resolve both issues simultaneously." All eyes turned to him expectantly. If Miss Blackwood, Mrs. Harrington, were to marry a Wyoming Territory resident, it would establish clear jurisdiction here. A territorial husband's claim would supersede that of an abandoned Eastern marriage, especially given the circumstances described. Silence followed this pronouncement, broken only by the sound of rain and distant thunder. Zara looked at Jake, whose expression had shifted to one of intense consideration. "Would that work legally?" he asked the judge. "A second marriage when the first hasn't been dissolved?" "In this specific case, yes," Judge Wilson replied. "Wyoming Territory recognizes the right of an abused wife to leave her husband. The second marriage would be considered valid here, making the first effectively void. Eastern courts might not recognize it immediately, but it would give us the jurisdiction needed to proceed with a formal divorce from Harrington." Jake turned to Zara, taking both her hands in his. "I had planned to do this differently," he said softly, "with more romance and less legal strategy involved." Understanding dawned on Zara as Jake dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hands. Around them, Sarah gasped softly, and even the typically stoic Sheriff Thompson looked moved. "Zara Blackwood," Jake said, his voice steady and sure. "I've loved you since you stepped off that stagecoach with nothing but your name and a determination that took my breath away. I'd be honored if you would take my name now not just as protection, but as a promise that you'll never have to face the world alone again." Tears blurred Zara's vision as emotion overwhelmed her. "Jake, are you certain? This could mean trouble for you, for the ranch." "I've never been more certain of anything," he replied firmly. "Double T means nothing without you. So I'm asking, will you marry me, Zara? Will you become my wife, my partner, the mother of my children someday?" The love shining in his eyes washed away her last doubts. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Jake Thornton, I will marry you." Jake rose, gathering her into his arms for a kiss that promised everything words couldn't express. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, they found their small audience smiling, Sarah wiping away tears, the judge looking pleased, and the sheriff trying unsuccessfully to maintain his professional demeanor. "Well then," Judge Wilson said, "I believe I have the authority to perform a wedding ceremony right now, if that's your wish." Jake looked to Zara, leaving the decision to her. "What do you think? Should we wait for better weather, proper preparations?" Zara shook her head, certainty filling her heart. "I've waited my whole life to feel this way. I don't want to wait another day to be your wife." And so, as lightning flashed and thunder rolled across the Wyoming sky, Zara Blackwood and Jake Thornton were married in the parlor of Double T Ranch. Sarah stood as witness, the children were hurriedly summoned to watch in wide-eyed wonder, and Sheriff Thompson served as best man. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, the traditional vows taking on deeper meaning for a woman who had known the hollow mockery of marriage and a man who had never expected to love again after devastating loss. "By the authority vested in me by the Territory of Wyoming," Judge Wilson concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Thornton, you may kiss your bride." Jake's kiss was gentle and reverent, a promise sealed before witnesses and God. When he finally released her, he kept one arm firmly around her waist as he faced the others. "Sheriff," he said, his voice steady, "I believe you can inform Mr. Harrington that my wife will not be returning to Boston with him." Thompson nodded, the hint of a smile playing at his lips. "I'll deliver that message personally." The storm continued through the night, but inside Double T's main house, warmth and celebration prevailed. Sarah prepared a wedding supper. The ranch hands were summoned from the bunkhouse to toast the newlyweds with the special whiskey Jake kept for important occasions. and even the children were allowed to stay up late to mark the momentous day. Later, when the guests had departed and the household had settled, Jake led Zara to the master bedroom, a room he had not shared since Elizabeth's death. He had prepared it while she was helping Sarah in the kitchen, lighting a fire against the storm's chill and placing wildflowers in a jar beside the bed. "It's not much of a wedding night," he apologized, gesturing to the simple room. "You deserve better than a hasty ceremony and legal maneuvering." Zara touched his face gently. "I have everything I could possibly want," she assured him. "I came to Wyoming with nothing but my name, Jake. You've given me yours, but more importantly, you've given me love, real love, based on respect and trust. That's worth more than all the fancy weddings in Boston." Jake caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I meant every word of those vows, Zara. Whatever comes tomorrow with Harrington and Porter, we'll face it together." "Together?" she agreed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him, sealing their private promise as husband and wife. Morning brought clear skies and the confrontation they had been expecting. Charles Harrington and Edwin Porter arrived at Double T shortly after breakfast, accompanied by a nervous-looking young man Jake identified as Porter's lawyer. They were met on the porch by Jake, Zara, Sheriff Thompson, and Judge Wilson, who had stayed the night rather than attempting to return to town in the storm. Charles's face darkened with fury when he saw Zara standing confidently beside Jake, their hands linked. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. "Caroline, get your things immediately. We're returning to Boston today." "My name is Zara Thornton now," she replied steadily. "And I'm not going anywhere with you, Charles." "Thornton." Charles looked between them, comprehension dawning. "You can't possibly believe that some frontier mockery of a marriage supersedes our legal union." Judge Wilson stepped forward. "Actually, Mr. Harrington, under Wyoming territorial law, it does exactly that. I performed the ceremony myself yesterday evening." Porter's lawyer shuffled nervously. "Judge Wilson, surely you understand the legal complications here. Mrs. Harrington is already married under Massachusetts law." "Mrs. Thornton," Jake corrected firmly, "was abandoned by a husband who abused her, by her own testimony and the evidence of injuries witnessed by multiple townspeople upon her arrival in Promise Creek. Wyoming territory recognizes her right to seek safety and establish a new life, including a new marriage." Charles's face flushed with rage. "This is absurd. I'll have this overturned immediately. Porter, your association has influence with the territorial government. Surely, the law is the law, Mr. Harrington," Sheriff Thompson interjected calmly. "And in this territory, a woman has rights that might surprise you." Porter, who had been observing the exchange with calculating eyes, finally spoke. "This changes the situation, Harrington. Wyoming's laws regarding women's rights are indeed unusual." "I don't care about local peculiarities," Charles snapped. "She is my wife." "Not anymore," Zara said, finding strength in Jake's solid presence beside her. "I suggest you return to Boston, Charles. There's nothing for you here." Charles took a threatening step forward, but Sheriff Thompson moved subtly to block his path. "I'd advise against any rash actions, Mr. Harrington. Assaulting a married woman in front of witnesses would get you a stay in my jail, Eastern connections or not." For a tense moment, Charles seemed poised to disregard the warning. Then, with visible effort, he controlled himself. "This isn't over," he promised coldly. "I'll take this to federal courts if necessary." "You're welcome to try," Judge Wilson said mildly, "but I wouldn't be optimistic about your chances. Wyoming territory has a strong interest in protecting its own legal determinations, particularly in matters regarding the rights of its female citizens." Porter placed a restraining hand on Charles's arm. "Let's discuss this back in town, Harrington. There may be other approaches to consider." The threat behind his words was clear, but Jake merely smiled. While you're considering approaches, Porter, you might want to know that I've been in communication with the territorial governor about certain monopolistic practices by the Cattlemen's Association. He's quite interested in ensuring fair access to water and grazing lands for all ranchers, regardless of size. Porter's expression hardened. Are you threatening me, Thornton? Not at all, Jake replied pleasantly. Just suggesting that using water rights as leverage in a private matter might attract unwelcome official scrutiny. A calculating look entered Porter's eyes. Perhaps we've all been hasty. Mr. Harrington, I believe we should return to town and reconsider our position. Charles looked as though he might argue, but something in Porter's expression stopped him. With a last venomous glare at Zara, he allowed himself to be led back to their waiting horses. This isn't over, he called over his shoulder as they rode away. Yes, Zara said quietly, more to herself than to him. It is. Jake's arm tightened around her waist. You were magnificent, he murmured into her hair. As were you, she replied, leaning into his strength. Do you think they'll really give up? Sheriff Thompson, overhearing, shook his head. Porter might. He's a businessman at heart, and Thornton's hint about the governor was well played. But Harrington, men like that don't accept defeat easily. Then we'll remain vigilant, Jake said. But we won't live in fear. This is our home, and no one will drive us from it. The sheriff tipped his hat. I'll keep an eye on them while they're in town. Judge Wilson and I should be heading back now. After the officials departed, Jake and Zara stood together on the porch, watching as ranch life resumed its normal rhythm around them. Ranch hands moved cattle in the distance. Sarah hung laundry in the yard with Emma's help, and Joshua chased his younger brother around the corral, their laughter carrying on the wind. It's not going to be easy, Jake said, his gaze on the horizon where dark clouds still lingered from yesterday's storm. Harrington will try again. Porter may back down on the water rights issue, but there will be other battles with the association. I know, Zara acknowledged, but we'll face them together. She turned in his arms to look up at him. I spent years being afraid, Jake. I'm not afraid anymore. Not with you. Jake's expression softened as he looked down at her. When you stepped off that stagecoach, you looked lost and alone. I never imagined then that finding you would mean finding myself again too. What do you mean? Zara asked, touched by the emotion in his voice. After Elizabeth died, I was just existing, running the ranch, taking care of Sarah and the children, doing what needed to be done. But the joy was gone. Jake's hand came up to cup her cheek. You brought it back, Zara. Your strength, your determination, your ability to build something new from nothing. It woke something in me I thought had died with Elizabeth. Tears filled Zara's eyes at his words. I came with nothing but my name, she whispered. And I gave you mine, Jake finished, his thumb gently wiping away a tear that escaped. But what you've given me in return is worth far more. You've given me a future I can believe in again. Their kiss was a promise of protection, of partnership, of a love that had been forged in adversity, but would endure through whatever challenges lay ahead. Autumn brought changes to Double T Ranch. The dispute with the Cattlemen's Association was temporarily resolved when the territorial governor personally intervened, ensuring fair water access for smaller ranchers. Charles Harrington returned to Boston after his lawyers confirmed that Wyoming's progressive laws regarding women's rights did indeed complicate his claims. Though he vowed to continue legal action, the immediacy of the threat had passed. Zara officially became mistress of Double T, moving from the cookhouse to the main house with Jake. Under her management, the household flourished. The vegetable garden expanded, preserves lined the cellar shelves for winter, and the home itself grew warmer and more inviting with small touches that reflected her Eastern refinement balanced with Western practicality. Sarah, rather than feeling displaced, welcomed the changes. "It's good to see this house becoming a true home again," she told Zara one evening as they prepared supper together. "After Daniel died and Jake lost Elizabeth, it was just a place we existed. You've brought life back to it." The children thrived under Zara's gentle guidance. Joshua found in her a patient teacher who recognized his quick mind and thirst for knowledge. Emma discovered a confidant who understood her emerging interest in both traditional women's skills and the more adventurous aspects of ranch life. And little Daniel, who barely remembered his father, found in Jake and Zara together the secure family unit he needed. As winter approached, Zara confirmed what she had begun to suspect: she was expecting a child. When she shared the news with Jake, his joy was tempered only by concern for her health. "Elizabeth was so ill throughout her pregnancy," he confessed, holding Zara close in their bed. "And in the end, I'm strong," Zara assured him, placing his hand over her still flat stomach. "And I have something Elizabeth didn't: the best of care from the beginning, and a reason to fight with everything I have." Jake's expression softened as he caressed the place where their child grew. "A baby," he marveled. "Our baby. The first of many, I hope," Zara said, delighting in his obvious joy. "I want to fill this house with children, Jake. Give Joshua, Emma, and Daniel cousins to grow up with." "Nothing would make me happier," he replied, kissing her with a tenderness that still took her breath away after months of marriage. News of the pregnancy spread quickly through the ranch and into Promise Creek. Widow Pearson arrived with hand-knitted baby blankets, and even the toughest ranch hands grew protective of Mrs. T, insisting on carrying heavy items and watching anxiously whenever she climbed stairs. Christmas transformed Double T into a haven of warmth against the Wyoming winter. Pine boughs decorated the parlor, handmade gifts were exchanged, and the entire ranch gathered for a feast that combined Zara's Eastern traditions with Western frontier practicality. As they sat before the fire that night, the children asleep and the house quiet save for the crackling flames, Jake pulled a small package from his pocket. "I have one more gift for you," he said, placing it in Zara's hands. She unwrapped it carefully to find a delicate gold locket. Opening it revealed a tiny portrait of Jake on one side, the other side empty. "For our child's picture," Jake explained, his voice husky with emotion. "So you'll always have both of us close to your heart." Tears filled Zara's eyes as she allowed him to fasten the locket around her neck. "It's perfect," she whispered, "just like everything else about this life we're building." Jake drew her close, his hand resting protectively over the slight swell of her stomach. "When you came to Promise Creek, you had nothing but your name," he said softly. "Now look at all you have: a home, a family, a future, and a husband who gave me his name and called it love," Zara finished, resting her head against his shoulder. Outside, snow fell softly on Double T Ranch, covering the land in a blanket of pristine white. Inside, by the warmth of the fire, Zara Thornton closed her eyes in contentment, surrounded by the love she had once thought impossible to find. The woman who had fled Boston with nothing but her name had found in Wyoming not just safety, but belonging. And in Jake Thornton, she had found not just a protector, but a partner who saw her strength as clearly as her vulnerability and loved her for both. As spring approached, bringing with it Zara's advancing pregnancy and the promise of new life for the ranch, a letter arrived from Boston. It was delivered by Sheriff Thompson himself, who rode out to Double T with an expression of concern. "Thought you should have this with a friendly face present," he explained, handing the official-looking document to Jake. "It's from a Boston law firm." Jake and Zara exchanged worried glances before he broke the seal and unfolded the papers. As he read, his expression shifted from apprehension to surprise and finally to a cautious relief. "It's from Charles's lawyers," he explained to Zara, who sat with one protective hand over her now prominent belly. He's dropping his claims. What? Why? Zara could scarcely believe what she was hearing. Jake scanned the document further. It seems he's engaged to a New York heiress. The letter states that, to avoid scandal that might jeopardize his upcoming nuptials, Mr. Harrington has elected to consider his previous marriage dissolved by abandonment and subsequent remarriage of the former Mrs. Harrington. Zara's hand trembled as she took the letter, reading the words for herself. He's letting me go, she whispered. After everything, he's simply letting me go. Sheriff Thompson cleared his throat. From what I gather, Harrington's been representing himself as a widower in Eastern society. Easier than explaining a runaway wife. This just makes it official. But what about his threats of federal court? Jake asked, still wary. Rich men hate public scandal more than they hate losing, the sheriff said with a shrug. My guess is his new fiancé's family has money and influence he doesn't want to risk by having his marital history scrutinized too closely. Whatever the reason, the letter represented freedom, true legal freedom that Zara had not dared to hope for. The constant fear that had lingered at the edges of her happiness began to dissolve as she realized that Charles had finally, truly relinquished his claim on her. There's one more thing, Jake said, examining the final page. He's formally renounced any claim to our child. Tears filled Zara's eyes. The last shadow over their future had been lifted. Their baby would be born with no legal complications, no possibility of Charles attempting to assert paternal rights as a way to punish Zara. It's really over, she said, her voice breaking with emotion. Jake knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. It's been over since the moment you stepped off that stagecoach, he said softly. This just makes it official on paper what we've known in our hearts. Sheriff Thompson discreetly excused himself, leaving the couple to absorb the news privately. When he had gone, Jake gathered Zara gently into his arms, mindful of her condition. I believe, he said, a smile spreading across his face. This calls for a celebration. The celebration became a community affair, with ranchers from miles around gathering at Double T to mark not just Zara's legal freedom but the coming spring and the promise of new life. It was a tradition in these parts, neighbors helping neighbors through the harsh winters and celebrating together when spring finally arrived. As twilight fell, lanterns were lit around the yard, and music began, fiddles and harmonicas playing tunes both lively and sweet. Despite her advanced pregnancy, Zara danced with Jake, her face glowing with happiness as he guided her in a gentle waltz. Are you happy, Mrs. Thornton? He asked, his blue eyes reflecting the lantern light. Completely, she replied without hesitation. Are you, Mr. Thornton? His answer was a kiss that drew good-natured cheers from those watching. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Jake kept her close in his arms. I never thought I'd find love again, he confessed. After Elizabeth died, I believed that part of my life was over. And then you arrived, bruised and frightened, but with such courage in your eyes. I was terrified, Zara admitted. I had no plan beyond escaping Charles. And yet look what you built from nothing, Jake said with admiration. A new life, a new family, a new future. Before Zara could respond, she gasped, placing a hand on her stomach. Oh! Jake's expression immediately turned to concern. What is it? Is something wrong? A smile spread across Zara's face as she guided his hand to the spot. Nothing's wrong. Your son or daughter is dancing too. The wonder on Jake's face as he felt their child move beneath his palm was something Zara knew she would remember forever. Around them, the celebration continued, music playing, people laughing and talking, but they stood in a world of their own, connected by the miracle growing between them. I love you, Zara Thornton, Jake said, his voice rough with emotion. You and our child and the family we're building together. And I love you, she replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him again. The man who gave me his name and called it love. 2 weeks later, in the master bedroom of Double T Ranch, Zara gave birth to a daughter. Jake paced anxiously outside as Sarah and Widow Pearson, who had experience as a midwife, attended the birth. When finally he was allowed in, the sight that greeted him brought tears to his eyes. Zara, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of Widow Pearson's knitted blankets. "Jake," Zara said softly as he approached the bed. "Meet your daughter." With trembling hands, Jake accepted the infant, staring in wonder at the perfect small face framed by wisps of dark hair. "She's beautiful," he whispered, "just like her mother. What shall we name her?" Zara asked, watching with love as Jake cradled their daughter with such tender care. Jake considered for a moment. "How about Elizabeth, after my first wife? And Caroline, after the brave woman you once were?" Tears filled Zara's eyes at his thoughtfulness. "Elizabeth Caroline Thornton," she tested the name. "It's perfect." "Little Eliza," Jake said, gently touching the baby's tiny hand, which immediately curled around his finger with surprising strength. "She has your spirit already." The days that followed were a blur of joy and exhaustion as the household adjusted to its newest member. Sarah proved invaluable, helping Zara navigate the challenges of motherhood while managing the household. The children were fascinated by their small cousin, with Emma particularly eager to help care for the baby. Spring yielded to summer, and Double T Ranch prospered. The disputes with the Cattlemen's Association faded as new territorial regulations ensured fair access to water and grazing lands for ranchers of all sizes. Porter, recognizing the changing political landscape, eventually approached Jake about a partnership to improve cattle breeding stock, a business arrangement that benefited both the large and small ranchers of the region. Zara thrived in her roles as wife, mother, and mistress of Double T. The woman who had arrived with nothing but her name had built a life richer than she could have imagined. Each night, as she nursed Eliza before placing her in the cradle Jake had crafted with his own hands, Zara would whisper stories to her daughter, stories of courage and perseverance, of finding strength when all seemed lost, of the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. And each night, Jake would join them, wrapping his arms around his family, his expression one of profound gratitude for the unexpected gift that had arrived on a dusty stagecoach a year before. "Did I ever tell you?" he asked one evening as they stood together by Eliza's cradle, watching their daughter sleep, "that the day you arrived in Promise Creek, I almost didn't go into town?" Zara looked up at him in surprise. "No, you never mentioned that." Jake smiled, pulling her closer. "I had planned to send one of the hands for supplies, but something, call it fate or divine intervention, made me decide to go myself." "Then I'm grateful for fate," Zara said, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Or perhaps it was always meant to be that I would find my way to you, and you to me." "I believe it was," Jake agreed softly. "Some things are simply written in the stars." Outside, those stars shone brightly over Double T Ranch, illuminating the land that had become Zara's home and the future that stretched before them, a future built on love, trust, and the courage to begin again. She had come to Wyoming territory with nothing but her name, and Jake Thornton had given her his, calling it love. But in truth, they had given each other so much more: second chances, healing, family, and a life neither had dared to dream possible. And as they stood together, watching over the daughter who represented all their hopes for the future, Zara and Jake Thornton knew that their greatest adventure was just beginning.